Folks, welcome to our video about risk management. We've basically created this to give you some guidelines as to exactly what the expectations and requirements are when providing Segway training, familiarisation and supervision throughout one of our Segway activities, and in this instance particularly our Segway tour at Rochford Wines. With risk management, the underlying principle is that you must do everything that is SFAIRP, and what that means is so far as is reasonably practicable. Essentially, if you're not doing everything that's reasonably practicable to avoid risk, to mitigate risk and to minimise the risk to your guests, you're not doing what you should. So we're taking you through step by step what needs to be done in the various different aspects of the tour. We hope you find it informative. I do want to say at this point that if you're unsure about absolutely anything, please do. In fact, you must let us know. Please don't hesitate to ask questions, and we trust that you'll find this informative and useful. Okay, so we're here in the Chardonnay Hall, and you've had your guests watch the pre-tour training video, and at this point in time, of course, we're going to provide them with their indemnity forms. Now, rather than just giving them the indemnity form and saying, here, read this and sign this, what you have to do at this point in time is grab the laminated card out of the box where the indemnity forms live and read to them the statement on the card. Now, essentially what we're doing here is we're giving them some context to what they're signing. Have a good read of the statement. I'll read it to you now. Please note that the indemnity form provided to you is a legal document and has legally binding effect. By signing this form, you're acknowledging that there are inherent risks in riding a Segway and accepting that all associated risk rests upon yourself. In the event that you're in any way injured, you're also releasing Segway Victoria and all of its agents and associates from any claim. Please read the form carefully, and if you understand what it says and are comfortable to accept these terms, sign at the bottom where indicated. If you have any queries about the form, please don't hesitate to ask me, but please note that I'm not a legal practitioner and I'm not in a position to provide advice of a legal nature. Should you not be comfortable to complete the form, you will not be able to partake in any Segway activities. So guys, it's absolutely essential that you read that out, because I can assure you that if somebody wants to make a claim against us, they're going to say that they didn't tell me what the form was. And that's our obligation to them in providing that form. When we finish the practical training down at the sound shell, of course, we're going to complete the other side of the indemnity form, or the last page of our indemnity form where they acknowledge that they've received training, which is also very, very important, because I can assure you that somebody bringing a legal case will claim that we didn't train them at all. So please make sure in this context, after the video, always read out the form. So you can see here the way that we set up our Segways prior to the activity. Essentially by putting them nose to tail like this, it prevents people from coming up and just getting on the Segway. Once upon a time we used to line them up differently, but on occasion people would step on before we were ready for them to. So by putting them in this sort of configuration, it stops people from coming up and getting on the Segways prior to us doing so, having them do so under our supervision. So when a guest first steps onto a Segway, it is absolutely imperative that you are in position holding the handlebars as they get on. Sometimes the Segway will buck back and forth as a guest actually mounts the Segway, so it's absolutely imperative that you're standing here and that they at that time are the only guest stepping onto a Segway within this space. So when we've got our guests up onto the Segway, as mentioned earlier, we're going to be holding onto that handlebar until they're upright and confident with the Segway standing still. We then require our guests to obviously get the Segway to start moving forwards and to demonstrate their capacity to steer and to stop. These are the things that are going to allow them to avoid obstacles. So what we're going to do is to remain in very close proximity to them, ask them to follow us as we move them around this space, being aware of not getting too close to the poles or to any other obstacle. Ask them to follow us, ask them to stop. We need them to be able to do that confidently and to be able to capably show us their ability to stop and to avoid obstacles. Personally, I like to use some witch's hats, and I ask them to negotiate around the witch's hat in a figure 8 configuration. So by going around this and avoiding it, they're showing their ability to steer capably, which demonstrates to me that I can now assess them as being capable of riding, steering and stopping, and I can then move them into the familiarisation area. So once we've assessed our guests for their capability to steer, stop and avoid obstacles, then it's fine to move them into the familiarisation area. As we do so, we need to also remain grass, so we need to remain in close proximity and assist them through this. And we're always going to follow the same path up to the familiarisation area. So we've got a pathway here now, a nice gravel path for them to follow up. Again, remaining very close until they're at the top of this hill and can therefore easily move onto the familiarisation area. Now we want them, when familiarising, always to stay on this grass area. That is to say, we're not going to have them going beyond the first gravel pathway. We also must remind our guests never to return into the soundstage area until we have finished familiarisation for everyone. So we want to keep those familiarising up on the grass and away from the soundstage where we're actually training people on an ongoing basis. So folks, once we've got our guests into the familiarisation area and they're riding around and getting used to riding on the Segways, we're going to obviously get our own Segway, get our own gear and head up to join with them. Now one of the things we're going to take with us, of course, is our backpack. Now the backpack is down here, and in the backpack we've got our first aid kit, we've got some rain ponchos, we've got various other equipment, but something important that lives in the backpack is our checklist. Now, no matter how experienced you are as a Segway guide, it's possible when training to overlook one of these items. So when you've done your training, you've got your guests up on the familiarisation area, grab out the checklist, have a look through, make sure you did cover every single one of these items, and if there is something that you managed to overlook, when you get onto the familiarisation area yourself, you can call your group in, get them to come together, take them through that item or items and ensure that absolutely everything is covered off. They'll never know that you overlooked it earlier. It'll just be something that you wanted to add or to go over separately, and that'll make sure 100% that every single one of our training items is covered. So once our group are all fully familiarised here on the green area, then we're going to depart around the vineyard. The direction that we're going to depart is up towards the eastern boundary, and we're going to go up past the side of the vines. Now as we go, another little obstacle to point out to you, there's a witch's hat, even if a broken witch's hat at the present here in the grass, and this is obviously something that needs to be avoided. This is actually a sprinkler head or a water outlet, so just make sure your guests are aware of that sort of thing as you ride past it. And as we leave this grassed area and depart along the eastern boundary, we're going to move away from this big flat wide open space and start to get into an area where there are some more undulations. There might be some potholes along the track. We're going to come past some trees and things, so you're going to need to make your guests aware that we are going to need to be aware of, they are going to need to be aware of areas they're riding over and watching out for those obstacles. So here is an absolutely classic case where you need to use your judgment as a tour guide of what's the appropriate thing to do on your tour. Normally we might just go between the trees here in heading down towards the southern boundary of Rochford, but today we've got an obstacle in place. We've got some fencing that's here because we've got a concert. Now you need to use your judgment to determine if it's safe to take the guests through this area where there's some narrowness and possibly uneven ground, or to take an alternate route. My recommendation in this situation would be to take an alternate route and simply go further down where there's a wider space or a driveway or gateway that you can travel through, instead of putting your guests at risk by taking through a narrow space, especially this early in the tour when they're not yet very accomplished Segway riders. So here's a situation where very early in our tour we've come across an area that is muddy. Now it's not always like this, of course. Today it happens to be there's been a bit of work done here and it's churned up, but ultimately we've got a situation, we've got a muddy patch that you need to assist your guests to avoid. We're very early on in the tour at this point in time. It never hurts just to point it out. If you don't point it out and they ride through it and they're not aware of it, then potentially you haven't done everything you could do to assist in their safety. By merely pointing it out and ensuring that they stay away from it, you've given the appropriate level of risk management. So we're here near the southeastern boundary of Rochford Wines, and at this point of the tour we're going to go up to the very southern boundary and along that boundary track. Here is the first point in your tour where you're going to have to go up something that vaguely resembles a steep hill. It's not very steep, but of course in going up any hill you do need to keep leaning forward. Trust the Segway, it's not going to suddenly fall over forward. Never hurts to give a bit of additional information as you go up this area that we need to just keep leaning in order to get smoothly up that hill. So we've successfully made our way around the early part of the tour. We've come to the paddock, the field, however we want to refer to this area. This is where we give our guests the opportunity, and I do want to stress that term, it is the opportunity to go faster. It's so important that our guests understand that nobody's holding a gun at their head and they've got to do any part of the tour if they don't want to. So if they don't want to go onto standard mode, it's absolutely no issue for them to remain on beginner mode. And it's also useful to stress that if they do go onto standard mode, they don't have to do 20 k's an hour. They don't need to do top speed any more than you need to drive your car at its maximum speed all the time. You simply don't. It's also great to let the guests know that we don't want them to suddenly start racing each other. We don't want them to start chasing each other. We don't need this sort of thing. And if you don't say that to them, sometimes that is immediately what they do. So just stress that to them, and also mention that we do initially want them to familiarise on that sort of speed before starting to become in any way reckless. And of course we never want our guests to become reckless, but what we do want them to do is to ride initially along the gravel areas. So down the middle we've got a gravel road, and around the perimeter we have a gravel road. Even on those gravel areas there is the capacity for some undulations or some potholes, so make them aware of that. And once they've familiarised at that speed, there's an opportunity to go off-road. But again, off-road, we've got some more uneven ground. So you may have puddles out there. It's really important that they keep their eyes ahead of them and are aware of what is upcoming so that they can slow down and avoid any obstacle. I always actually point out the tree. There is only one tree in this space, but believe it or not, once upon a time over the years I did actually have to rescue somebody out of the tree. So pointing out any obstacle or potential risk is a really, really important part of what we're here to do. So another really important thing to tell your guests when moving from beginner mode to standard mode is about how the steering and how dynamic it is changes from the beginner mode to the standard mode. So this machine here is on the beginner mode, and as you'll see, when on beginner mode, no matter how vigorously I pull the handlebar to one side or the other, the machine will only rotate quite slowly. I'm now going to change the machine over to the standard mode and demonstrate for the group that the steering becomes much more dynamic. Now this is not of itself a major problem because you shouldn't be pulling the handlebar from one side to the other at any time. However, when you come to a rest, when you come to a stop, if you're getting off the Segway and you're not well balanced, what you can find is that if you pull the handlebar, the thing can spin as you're starting to get off, and that can cause a potential risk, particularly to your knee or a potential fall from the Segway. So just by demonstrating that and just reminding people perhaps to put their hands in the middle of the handlebar when stepping on and off, making sure they bring it to a full stop, you've told them about that, you've done what's appropriate from a risk management point of view. So while your group are now riding around this wide open space, it's absolutely imperative that you maintain supervision of them, watching them closely throughout the course of the entire experience. It's obviously not appropriate that you sit here to making a phone call or checking your phone or anything like that. Your role is to supervise and to supervise at all times that your guests are on the Segway. Now you can't be watching each individual at all times, but you certainly shouldn't be standing here staring into space. You want to be scanning the area, making sure that everyone's okay, and be absolutely ready to respond in the event that anyone has any issues. Likewise, if you see anyone riding recklessly, it is absolutely required that you get over there straight away and remind them about riding safely. Your job as a supervisor is at all times when your guests are riding, there's absolutely no time when you should be doing anything that diminishes your capacity to supervise your group while they're actually on their Segways. So we wanted to point out to you another hazard that is on the course, and it's not a particularly dangerous hazard, but it is a hazard, and it's certainly a hazard if you're not expecting it and not aware of it, and that of course is puddles. Now of course we only have puddles here at Rochford at times when there's been recent rain, but if you're riding toward a puddle at high speed and unaware of it, it could become a problem. Segways don't generally have any problem riding through puddles, and as long as you take it at an appropriate speed like any other surface, you should be absolutely fine. But it is certainly something we would warn our guests about and tell them that they may elect to go through a puddle. We would never direct a guest to go through a puddle. You never direct a guest to go through any hazardous area at all or any area that's challenging. It's a good idea to tell them about it and tell them that they may go through it if they choose. So guys, where we are now is a really good opportunity to talk to you about changing conditions of different surfaces throughout the tour. Obviously with different weather conditions and with different vineyard conditions and what's happening in the area, things change over a period of time. So at certain times of year and at certain times in the past, I've had absolutely no hesitation in taking people up this road. But right at the moment, looking at the quality of the road and the damage that's been done to it recently by water and or earthworks, it's probably an area that I'd avoid. So it is again your judgment to where you think is appropriate to take your people. Now, if at the moment you think that it's not appropriate to take your group along here, and this will again come down to the ability of the group and how confident they are, etc. All these things have got to be taken into mind. If you're not going to take them here, you simply have to find an alternate area. And if there isn't an alternate area that you can safely ride, then the only appropriate course of action is to get your group off their segways and to walk them until they're in an area where it's easy and safe to ride again. So we're here at the beginning of the all-terrain course, and as you would be very well aware, this is where we start out with the all-terrain course at what I call the small bridge. Now, when you arrive at this location, it's a great idea, in fact it's absolutely essential to remind your guests that this part of the experience is certainly not compulsory. That it's entirely up to them if they want to undertake this part of the activity, and if they'd prefer, they can simply ride around on the flat area nearby. There's vines nearby, they're welcome to explore in that area, and we'll talk more about riding amongst the vines in just a moment. But undertaking this area, it's imperative that you have an understanding of the condition of the course, and if you haven't been around the course before the tour, that the first time you go around the course, you get your group off, park their segways up, and walk around the course so you have an opportunity while doing that to point out to them the different risks or the different hazards, the different obstacles that they're going to encounter on their journey around the course. So over the course of the year, obviously with segways operating in this area with prevailing weather conditions, rain, etc., there can be damage to our surfaces, and it's really important for you in your risk assessment, whether before the tour or before riding around this area with your guests, to simply observe the condition of the course. Now if you were to observe, for instance, that there's a big puddle here and that potentially for any rider it might be difficult or challenging or dangerous for them to ride through this area, then you very simply have to omit it. You have to decide not to undertake the area if you're concerned about the safety of it. It's also obviously imperative that either you yourself fix up the area by accessing our gravel and so on, or alternatively to contact management to ensure that it's fixed as soon as possible. So here on the ground we've got an area that's becoming a little bit worn, and given there's been a bit of recent rain, it may be a little bit slippery. It's probably okay in its current state, but when you check out your course, if you see that this area it represents a risk that you're at all uncomfortable with, or that you're uncomfortable that your clients might not be able to negotiate safely, then it is absolutely imperative that you don't let them use this space until it's been addressed. Clearly we can take some remedial action here. We can put some gravel down to improve the traction, but it's up to your judgment, and you must be very carefully making the judgment that you're comfortable for your guests to ride over that. So as you journey along the track, doing your risk assessment, it's important to consider all sorts of obstacles. Here at the side of the track we have what can only be described as a fairly small obstacle. Still, it might be worth considering removing these. There's another branch overhanging here. All of these sort of things can be easily removed. There are secateurs and saws in the shipping container. So in creating our video today, we've actually come across a risk that is exactly the sort of thing that you are absolutely required to address if you come across it during the course of either a tour or your risk assessment pre-tour or pre-activity. Now what I've come across here today happens to be a broken glass bottle on the ground. No idea how it got there, probably was thrown out of somebody's window when they're attending an event, but clearly we can't leave it there. It's got to be removed, and you can only imagine that if we'd seen that and somebody then fell off and injured themselves on it, we just haven't done everything that we can reasonably practically do in order to guarantee their safety. So very, very simply, we're going to pick it up and get rid of it. So here we have the area where you cross over what sometimes has water flowing through it. Here's where the dam flows over into the next property. I call it the rock culvert. Sometimes the water levels are high, sometimes there's no water here at all. You've obviously got to evaluate that and make sure that it is safe before you let any guest ride across this area. In the event that the water is too high, clearly this area's got to be eliminated from the tour on that day. So we're here at the northern end of the all-terrain circuit. When you do your figure eight, this is sort of the top part of the eight where you turn back, and this is an area where we can from time to time see quite a lot of water. From time to time we'll see water running out of the area to our right over here and running across, which can make this area muddy and therefore slippery. So it's really important that you evaluate this area carefully and determine what needs to be done, if anything, either to completely avoid the area or to ensure that the risk is minimised to our guests. So as you can see here, we've got some aluminium ramps on the ground for our guests to journey across. But from time to time, areas to either side of this can be rather muddy and potentially slippery. So you need to decide, again, either to completely isolate the area or to just isolate some areas. An appropriate way to isolate some areas and to try to ensure that your guests don't go into a slippery, muddy area is to simply grab the witches' hats that are kept in this area for exactly this purpose, and quite simply to section off the area, making it very clear that that area should be avoided through the course of their activity. By simply doing that, or to whatever extent you think is necessary to avoid the area, to avoid the riders riding through this sort of area, that assists in maximising their possible safety. So once we've left the all-terrain area, in many ways the most challenging aspects of the tour are behind us. What you don't want your guests to do, however, is to now become blasé and think that between here and the end of the tour there's no risks at all. Because if they become careless, if they think I'm now an expert Segway rider, I've got through all of that very easily and are now accomplished, then there is of course the possibility of issues to come. So just a reminder of that reality. Guys, between here and the end point, we still do have some hazards, so we need you to remain careful. You may at this point in time also give your guests the option to ride between the vines. And for many guests that's something they're really keen to do. So that's something they absolutely can do, but a warning that between the vines the ground can be somewhat undulating, there can be potholes. Sometimes the grass is quite long between the vines, so they do need to ride carefully. Simply a reminder of that reality, rather than just letting them go silly, points out to them that yes, it could be a little bit bumpy in there, and that they do need to maintain caution. Now of course you don't have to ride between the vines. There is the alternative of simply riding up the side here on the gravel track. Again, it's entirely up to your guests, but you need to give them that option. Now folks, this is an absolutely classic example of something that in many ways you'd like to think wasn't worthy of mention, but guess what, it absolutely is worthy of mention. Simply here at the moment we've got quite long grass. Now when you're riding through long grass, any potholes or undulations can be obscured and more difficult to see, so simply by reminding your guests to stay out of the long grass, or if riding through long grass to ride very carefully, you're doing what you need to do to assist in preventing risk to your guests. So at this point of the tour, it's always a good idea to simply maintain a high awareness of where your group is, and part of that is that they can tend to stretch out. Towards the end of the tour, they're sometimes looking to maximise their experience by spending some time in amongst the vines or whatever, and maybe they're getting a bit blasé, they're having a chat to you as you're riding, so it's really important, especially if you're near the front of the group, to keep mindfulness of where the back of the group is. Because the last thing you want to be is with 6 people at the front, but the last half dozen have drifted out of your line of sight. So simply by maintaining that awareness, looking back, as you can see, there's a bit of a distance between where we are now and down at the corner where we've turned along Maroondah Highway. So always remember to try to keep mindfulness about where all members of your group are, not just those who happen to be chatting with you at that particular point in time. So we're nearing the end point of the tour here. We've come to a point where we're now going to cross over the road, and there is a gate here as well, which should at least assist in our guests not crossing over by themselves. So what we're going to do, of course, is assist in opening and closing the gate, making sure it remains closed when not being used. We're going to assist our guests through. We're also going to make sure they cross over the road directly. Our guests are not to cross, to ride down the driveway, they're simply to go across the road. So here our role is traffic management. We either stop the segways to allow cars that might be coming along the road to pass before allowing the segways to cross over. We certainly make clear to our guests that they are required to cross directly over the road and remain on that side and are not to be riding on the driveway. So at the end of the tour, you've returned to the green, the wide open grass space that we started out at. It's really important at this point in time to remember that your guests now are often feeling like this is their last little opportunity to get the most out of their Segway experience. You might give them 10 minutes to have a bit of a ride around before finishing up and making their way back over to the starting point at the sound shell where they're going to get off their Segways for the last time. So it's important to keep in mind that at this point in time you want to ensure your guests don't start becoming silly and to keep a close level of supervision. Don't ever forget that it's your job to supervise your guests right up until the point at which they get off their Segways and are finished. You might go back over to the sound shell, jump off your Segway, pop it away and maintain a visual oversight of the entire area, but you must maintain that level of supervision. Another area that you might want to consider while we're here in this area is the hill. So over here on the right, on my right, the hill is an area that should be approached with some caution. So if guests are going to ride on the hill, we don't want them riding up the hill, certainly in any area that is even vaguely steep. If they want to ride along the hill, they want to come up this area here where it's nice and flat, nearest to the driveway, ride along the top and ride carefully down the hill. People often do want that sort of all-terrain experience, but we want to manage it as carefully as we can, so it's appropriate if you're coming here to talk about the hill that you want to ride up this area that's relatively flat, along the top a little way, and then ride down slowly and in a controlled fashion.